In tonight's Dorchester segment, we catch up on plans for a new waterfront housing and one more setback for one more helping of fast food in Codman Square. To bring us up to date is the managing editor and publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, Bill Forry. Thank you very much for being with us once again, Bill.
Happy to be back, Chris.
Bill, this is our last segment of the year, and I have to admit that Dorchester segments this year have been just development. So is there one takeaway, one big story that we either should get from this or keep our eye on at this point?
Well, development is the big story of the year in Dorchester, and it's been a long time coming. A lot of stuff has been in the pipeline and still is, and I think 2020 is going to maybe be the big year where you actually see major projects like Dot Block, which we've been talking about for years now, actually break ground. The Bayside development at the old Bayside Expo will probably come into form in the early part of 2020. But yeah, 2019 has been a lot of the debate around these projects, and that's ongoing, whether it's in Port Norfolk or just in a general sense about how does the city leverage this big citywide boom to create more affordable housing in places like Dorchester and Mattapan. We're starting to see projects like yesterday there was a groundbreaking for Cote Village in Mattapan. We're starting to see some of that filter out into the outer parts of our neighborhoods, but that development boom that's really crystallized downtown in big numbers, how do we take that, bring it into the neighborhood setting, and keep people who want to stay in Dorchester and Mattapan in their neighborhoods?
Well, the city currently has an inclusionary development program, which is basically a set aside of money from big developments to fund affordable housing.
Right.
I think there's been a sort of a standard rate of 13%, and the city's trying to see if they can push that up a bit, right?
Yeah, so the Walsh administration has already tinkered with that formula. Back in 2014 actually, the mayor issued an executive order which changed the way they distribute the funds. It created 3 zones in the city. But the IDP, Inclusionary Development Policy, has never really been codified. It's kind of governed under state law, as many things in Boston are. Home rule petition is the way the city of Boston has to, the council and the mayor have to pass and sign a home rule petition to change things like how they can raise revenue, how they can levy a tax essentially on development. And so that's what the mayor this week did. He went to Beacon Hill. He spoke in front of the Committee on Housing and spoke about a bill which passed unanimously at the City Council and which he supports, which would allow the city to change the formula for how they extract linkage money from developers. Not only the amount, but the frequency with which they can change it. Because right now, state law prohibits the city from tinkering with that formula within 3 years. So every 3 years, the city can come back and say, well, we want to change it to this. But in this dynamic development boom time, the mayor, the council, they want the capacity to change that formula, to make it more aggressive, to extract more dollars, to go into the Housing Trust Fund, which can then seed new projects in places like Dorchester, Mattapan, and elsewhere in the city where there needs to be more affordable housing. Also
pending in the State House is this measure to get as much as 2% from transfer of real estate that's worth at least $2 million. That could mean speculation magnets in luxury housing, but that could also mean office buildings too, couldn't it?
It could. It could include commercial. So this would be potentially, with the early calculations and maybe a conservative estimate, somewhere like $150 million a year that could be put into the affordable housing pipeline. The way that this home rule petition was written and the law that's the bill that's now before the legislature is written, it would allow for 2%, as you said, of a property sale of $2 million or more to be collected by the city of Boston. 1% of that would come from the seller, 1% would come from the buyer, for a total of 2%. And the city's estimates show that could be substantial revenue for the city, particularly when you consider, I believe, what they are accustomed to having in linkage per year is about $45 million a year. So it would kind of like quadruple that sum. It could be significant for new housing starts and leveraging funding for the projects that are on the bubble and may or may not get built.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Bill Forry from the Dorchester Reporter. Bill, development is also pushing against the envelope of climate change. That's certainly the case in Port Norfolk. Another review of another plan, but people in the neighborhood seem more receptive. So what's changed here?
Well, it's still a mixed bag. There's definitely resistance to this latest project. This is a project that's been dubbed Neponset Wharf, and if anybody knows where Venezia restaurant is in Port Norfolk, That's the site we're talking about, right next to Venezia. There's a huge old marina that's there. It looks dilapidated. It's pretty aged and hasn't been used well. And so this is a site along the waterfront. It's a beautiful vista. I'm sure you've seen it, of the Boston skyline, Columbia Point, Quincy. And it's a prime location. The problem is, it is a peninsula. It's a pretty isolated one. There's not a lot of easy access in and out. So neighbors who live on the port, in Port Norfolk, have made legitimate arguments about infrastructure, access, transportation, parking. But you know, this is now the third iteration of this plan in 4 years. And City Hall, through the BPDA, which led a meeting earlier this month on the topic, really wants to see something happen here. It's pretty clear. The BPDA project manager at the outset of the meeting this month said, look, we know there's been a lot of opposition to this, but we want to try to break the logjam, is what he said. The logjam is a significant one, though. Neighbors really are resistant to density in that site. And climate resiliency, as you mentioned, is a significant issue. Climate Ready Dorchester, which is a planning initiative rolled out just in the last few months by the Walsh administration, targets Dorchester and Port Norfolk in particular. How do we build there? What are going to be the kind of the guidelines? That process is just in the early stages, and neighbors there are saying, well, wait a minute, you want us to make decisions about this particular project, but we haven't even decided how we want to grow here, what we're going to do to safeguard the neighborhood.
And one difference between this and Marina Bay and Quincy is that you can't get to this housing unless you drive through some small residential streets.
Yeah, it's pretty tight quarters. In Port Norfolk Street, for example, Erickson Street, where this project is located, they are tight. However, you know, there's a flow of traffic in and out of there right now for Venezia, the banquet hall, Boston Winery. There are other businesses there now. So there is a counter argument that, look, something is going to be built here. And that's basically the message the Walsh administration is sending. Now, the mayor basically put the brakes on this project a year and a half ago and said, I want the development team from City Point Capital, which is the project initiator, to go back to the drawing board and kind of come up with a new plan. They've done that. They've come out now, and there's a signal from the Walsh administration now that's saying, look, we want the neighborhood to try to put their heads together and figure out what will work here.
In fast food, a lot of people in the community, they don't really have much appetite for fast food. Popeyes has been dealt a setback by the licensing board this time. So what's going to happen next?
Well, it's pretty clear that 2020 will not bring a Popeyes to Common Square. That's the decision of the licensing board last week, which was unanimous and made without prejudice, which means Popeyes cannot come back for another full year.
I mean, with prejudice, I think.
I'm sorry, with prejudice. What that means essentially is they can't come back and seek a new license to open a restaurant at that particular location for a year. Now, they can appeal this, and they probably will. Popeyes has already gone to court over this issue once. We're in year 4, Chris, of this Popeyes saga. And there is a debate within the neighborhood. Some people very much want to see it open. But there's a strong core group based out of the Common Square Neighborhood Council, which is an influential group, that says, look, we've been fighting for decades for better food options, better business options in our neighborhood, and we just don't want to see this add to the proliferation of fast food and unhealthy options. The licensing board agreed with them. There is precedent for that, right? Not just with food. I can remember covering in the 80s and 90s, and you probably do too, check cashing places were a big flashpoint for politicians.
And very briefly, I would be remiss if we didn't have you mention that there's a new Dorchester member of the City Council. There is.
Well, Julia Mejia, who has won the recount by 1 vote, which is a significant victory for her and for anybody who believes in the power of 1 vote. And it certainly held true here. So she will join as an at-large councilor.
And by the way, one more time, your website for people to get more information?
.news.com.
Thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thanks,
Forry
Chris.
From the Dorchester Reporter. In a moment, we'll tell you about a call for mentors from Big Brother, Big Sister, but first, his message.